compliance and security are not the same thing.
If you've ever wondered how compliance can go from complex regulations to tactical, scalable actions and become a business advantage, you're in the right place. Joining me is Alexander Byrne, Director of Compliance at Thrive.
In my biased opinion, I think that compliance really can be a business accelerator.
Before I get deep into today's topic, think about the last app or digital device you used. It probably had a slick interface, lightning fast response, and seamless experience. But behind the scenes, there's a whole world of back-end architecture, cryptography, APIs, and not forgetting compliance. Last episode, we touched on how compliance can be just a checkbox exercise and what it means for your security. But today, we'll be flipping it and talking about how it can be a strategic layer in your tech stack. Welcome to Trust.ID Talk. I'm your host, Michelle Davidson, and if you've ever wondered how compliance can go from complex regulations to tactical, scalable actions and become a business advantage, you're in the right place. Joining me to decode this topic is Alexander Byrne, Director of Compliance at Thrive. Welcome to the podcast.
Great. Good morning, Michelle. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you, Alexander. Or can I call you Alex?
Yeah, Alex is good. Thank you.
Perfect. So in your experience, how many organizations view compliance as a box checking exercise?
Yeah, so it's tough to put a number around this. I actually did a little bit of research and I saw I saw a wide range of numbers. So I put it anywhere from 35% to 50%. But in my experience, I certainly think that this is a perspective that's prevalent across a number of different market sectors. And where, to your point, companies are just looking at compliance as maybe just a cost center or it's a mandate. So it's something that we have to do in order to conduct business. And in some instances, I think this might be the right approach, right? If your ROI thesis is strong enough and, it really is just something that can ride as kind of a sidecar to the business. But in my biased opinion, I think that compliance really can be a business accelerator, especially in the current landscape where we're in a much more technological and digital world. And I think more and more companies are actually starting to realize that checking the box isn't going to cut it, especially when you start to consider the, intertwined cybersecurity and regulatory complexity concerns that are coming over and, becoming part of the compliance landscape and the initiatives that a lot of firms are engaging in. A common point that often gets confused, especially if there's somebody who's not practicing in the space, is that compliance and security are not the same thing. They're very close, but you can be compliant without being secure. You could be secure without being compliant with something. I think that in instances where compliance is required to conduct business in your sector, so more highly regulated like finance, healthcare, it is a fundamental requirement. So I think it's viewed there as more of a box checking exercise. But again, even in that sector, there's different variances that have to be considered. So geographic operating areas, for example, it was just published yesterday, was participating in a research project where we were examining the regulatory differences for hedge funds between the United States and in the European Union. And 60% of the respondents that came back to us were across multiple jurisdictions. And of that 60%, 47% of those indicated that it had become somewhat or significantly more difficult and complex for their compliance obligations in the last 5 years. Kind of a micro view, but I think it does highlight the increasing role that compliance is starting to play across the wider financial services sector. And I think that finance typically either leads the way or is one of the leaders if you're looking at broader compliance requirements. They're usually a little bit towards the front of the pack, given how stringent the controls are to operate in that sector. So I like to think of that sometimes as a barometer that we can look at for what might be coming down the pike for other industries as well.
No, some fantastic points. Thank you, Alex. I just would like to take the opportunity to unpick some of the bits you said there, talking around compliance and security are not the same thing. Do you mind expanding on that just a little bit on what you mean and what sort of things people might want to look out for when, is it compliance or is it security? Could you just explore a bit further?
Like I said, there's so many different things you could be compliant with. We have to get it from the kind of regulatory legally speak into, well, what does that actually mean? What's the ask? What's the requirement? Then what does that mean for my business? Get it down to that level where as the maybe non-technical business leader, I don't know what that means. But I know that that's what I have to do. And I can go talk to IT and say, turn on AES 256 for my, data at rest storage. And IT will say, yeah, I got it. And then they can come back to you and verify that has happened, right? So I know I'm compliant there. I think that's where a lot of the kind of the discrepancy might happen, right? So if you don't have the capability to perform that entire cycle and you just say, well, I know I have to have encryption, right? But I don't know, you don't understand what that means and you turned on maybe TLS 1.2 or something like that, great. Or, some other cipher. And you didn't understand that maybe, or you didn't quite get down to the part where, no, we're talking about data at rest encryption for, at your file server or maybe in your cloud instance or something. I think that's where, unless you have that capability, and every organization is different, that's where there's always that grain of salt where looking at, okay, how mature is their program really? And I think that's what's lending itself more and more in, I'd say at least definitely the last 5 years, but more and more vendor due diligence exercises. I mean, we get hammered with that in Q4 at Thrive, which we're a critical provider for many organizations, but we also go out and do it as well. I want to understand if you're doing something for my business that we require to operate, and it's going to be a big problem for me if you have a data breach, if you have an availability problem, and you can tell me that you have, your program in place. I actually want to see, you don't always get policies and procedures or internal documentation, but I want to see your audit report. I want to see that you did a pen test. I want to see that, all of these, as much as you can give me artifacts to prove that, yes, my posture actually is set up that way. Help me make a determination and not just have you or somebody with the title of maybe CISO, right? Because you could, I'm not saying people intentionally do that, but there are different levels to it and you need to make sure that you can verify it. So I think that's where, that discrepancy comes into play at a more deeper level versus just, I'm compliant with Reg SID. And it's like, well, that means nothing for information security.
There sounds to be like there's a lot of technical jargon around compliance that can be quite difficult to unpick sometimes. What would you say is kind of the first step if someone's trying to navigate the world of compliance that's fairly new to the industry, or even if they're seasoned and they're trying to unpick something new that's come in? What would you recommend be their first step in taking to understanding it?
Yeah, that's something that I still work hard at, I think. And I don't think that ever really goes away. I think you just kind of maybe get a little better at it. But what I would say is if you're sitting at the kind of beginning of your compliance journey, either as somebody practicing or at your company, and you know you're supposed to be doing something or you should do something, but you don't know where to start. I think that the best course of action there is to go for an industry standard. So I'll use NIST CSF as kind of a benchmark here. That's a pretty common one. If I didn't know anything about your business and you asked me that question, that's probably what I would tell you to go look at first. It comes from NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They publish a number of standards for across different areas of technology to help businesses make sure and government organizations make sure that they're aligning with what the current best practice is. So I think that's what I would tell them to do is go look at the NIST Cybersecurity Framework or CSF. Version 2.0 is the most recent one. It has 5 different domains, and then there's sub-practice areas and then individual controls. So it's kind of a tree down. And I would look at that because if you get all the way down to the controls in the CSF, they are written out in what I was just using, as my example, right? It does say things like encrypt this data. It's pretty clear. Go through that, pick what is applicable to your business, right? So if it says something like, encrypt your database or make sure you're doing software development securely, but you don't do software development, you can exclude those controls. You don't always have to do everything. Pick what's relevant to you. And then you have your measuring stick. You have your baseline, something you can work around, assess yourself against, see which ones you do check the box in. And then there's going to be some that you don't. And I always half jokingly, but mostly seriously say, if you get a report back, everybody wants to be perfect, but if it comes back as you're 100% on something like this or a vulnerability scan or something is wrong. It didn't work. The process, you have to go back and look at maybe the scope that you were looking at. So what you should be coming out of from that exercise is a list of things that you don't have or things you need to improve on at least. And then from there, you can start prioritizing based on, how complex is it to change this to a yes? What's my budget? How many resources do I actually have, right? So you can kind of start steering the ship where don't do everything at once, but now we've got an order. We're going to do these 3 now. And then when our budget resets in 26, we're going to do these 5 things. And then so you are making those changes over time and getting better.
So compliance has typically been one step behind some of the technological advancements. But you mentioned NIST, and so I can't not go down this road. They've been paving the way for the PQC standards, with the quantum computing. What does it mean for the industry with those sort of standards, that actually being at the forefront of these changes rather than being a step behind?
So I think one of the benefits of having NIST is that they already are, they already published, I think it was like last year, they already published 3, what are supposed to be, I guess this remains to be seen, but quantum proof cryptography algorithms that should withstand an attack from a quantum enabled computer. So the fact that we even had this last year means at least 5 years ago, they started talking about this and R&Ding it. And that means even before that, they were thinking about, at some point, Q-Day is coming. We should probably start doing something. And you know what I mean? So, and same thing with AI. I think it looks like to maybe the public that they dropped their AI risk management framework real fast. And they were like, wow, those guys are really good. They've been working on that for a long time. They've got all the experts there that were following along. And it's just, they were kind of almost ready for it. And then now I think the next frontier probably is quantum. Recently, when I was finishing my master's degree which was in technology management. So there was a lot of like-minded people in there academically talking about it, but not really in its practical, what's going to happen when that actually comes out, right? That part hasn't really been touched yet. But again, I think organizations like NIST, and there's a number of other ones, they are thinking about this already. They're already moving down that path, which makes me feel good, because if that happened tomorrow, I'd be like, I had no idea. I have a lot of learning to do. I have no idea what to do now. So
it's refreshing in a way that it's kind of riding along with the developments of the technology. But it was also a little bit scary, because we're going to have a big steep learning curve when the time comes to get our head around it all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're seeing that learning curve right now with AI. So we have like the AI Act in the EU came out. That's more towards, I believe, secure and responsible development of AI and distribution of AI, less so how should you use it in an enterprise context. But I think there are some good points in there that I think everybody can take from. So, and then of course, if you're a company that's operating cross borders, you don't have that in the US. You have maybe some states are thinking about it. We have an executive order. The president thinks it's a good idea. But beyond that, there's no kind of framework built. So again, you're looking at those different sources. We're actually seeing it over the last few years, but even right now, it's coming, like it's happening right now. You can actually watch, what's happening. And I actually thought it would be cool to like run that through maybe ChatGPT and have it like redline its own, the governance framework that's supposed to be on top of it. But maybe I'll do that for fun over the weekend or something. So
it's definitely a lot of unknowns right now in the industry, especially when it comes to those kind of topics we've covered. I just want to circle back, if I can, to what would be the number one kind of strategic tactic that you would recommend to a business when they're looking at their current compliance posture?
So a couple points. Talking to the business side, I would go to them and say, what's the plan what's the, vision for the next 3 years? Because what I would want to know right off the bat, are we going to go do something new? Are we going to move into a new geographic market or a new maybe client vertical, things like that. So I would want, as much as I can, forecasting from, the leadership in my business to then be able to take that and say, oh, okay, we're going to, maybe we're opening an office in Europe. We don't have one right now. Okay, now I've got much more, privacy is going to become much more, I got to go read up on GDPR and really get into that, those types of things. Also, things like, even if you're not subject to it yourself, right? If you're moving into like CMMC right now in the US for the DIB, the Defense Industrial Base, that's huge. Everyone's doing it. Everyone's looking at it. Everyone's trying to figure out how they strategically fit in there. But if your company said they were getting into that, right? Like that's a whole new, like this 171 R2 that you have to go read that, understand that, do it for yourself, then be able to do it for the clients, right? So that's what I would want to do probably first. If there wasn't much change at that point, I would then probably be saying, like, okay, we should probably be looking at maybe where we think we could use some additional technology enhancements to I don't want to like push automation, but automation in the sense of security, I think is a good idea, right? Like, are we really using, do we have a SOC that's enabled with their threat detection with AI? And like, are they using next gen services, or do we just have maybe, firewalls? And again, everybody's at their different stages in the pathway, but I'd be looking at how I could probably up my tech stack, assuming I had all the basics in place. Like I already have MFA, I already have encryption on my files, I already have disaster recovery and backups. If I'm covered there, and it would be really about looking what strategically would be the next thing that we could allocate those resources to in terms of our advancing our technology capabilities. Probably around threat detection. Do we have, do we have EDR? Do we have MDR, XDR, all the DRs, whatever the newest acronym is? I'd be looking at that, not just to have the newest thing, but to be like, does that make sense for us? And how will that make us more secured? Right. Is probably what I'd be looking for, barring any, again, major strategic changes coming up that you'd have to prepare for. So.
Thank you so much, Alex. There's a lot of acronyms to get your head around in compliance. I'm getting that sense. But what would you say is the most common cybersecurity myth or misconception that you come across, especially when it does come to compliance?
I think the myth that more policies equals better compliance is something that I've seen sometimes. So the belief really is around that the more documentation you have, the stronger that your compliance posture is going to be. But I think that this actually can have a negative effect. It can actually, if you create something that's overly complex, it becomes really hard for you to manage. It becomes really difficult for your users to even understand where they fit in your system and what they're supposed to be doing. And when that starts to happen, that's really where the negative impact of the business comes in. So people might be signing your policies if you ask them to do that every year, but if it's too much, they didn't understand. If it's 75 pages, they didn't understand it. So I think for compliance programs to be successful, they need to work for, but also with the business. And then this is going to sound pretty straightforward, but making sure that they're tailored to the organization. So I think a first step for a lot of companies is you go and you get that policy deck and those templates there's a ton of sources out there, which is great. But you need to read them and make sure that they're saying things that make sense to you. If it's just generic boilerplate language and you're coming in, you should be able to look at that and say, oh, I understand how that applies to what we do. If it doesn't do that, that's, again, as an employee reading it, I'm not going to know. I'm going to be like, okay, this, I'm not going to understand how that should be impacting me in my day-to-day. So if it's happening at your business or you're listening here and you're like, oh, I have that same problem, I don't think it's a negative. It's just something that you should be aware of and focus on to move forward.
Perfect. I mean, every business is unique, and it's interesting to hear that there is such a thing as more than enough compliance. If we're going to move towards the end now, we like to end our episodes by asking our guests, what is the one piece of tech you could not live without, and why?
So you probably get this answer all the time, and I have to go with my iPhone. I think it really is the flexibility component, especially as it comes to work and life, right? Being able to be connected, but I can still go to, run out and go to the park with my daughter. But still, if my boss calls me, we're fine. Or if I have to, I respond to an email right there. I don't have to stop, go back, tether to the desk. Now do it. Now we can go back out, right? I can go, either do that or not do that, right? Again, turning off is also a benefit of having that too. You can mute everything. And I will say an honorable mention here is my Garmin smartwatch. It does have a golf app on it. Awesome. Telling you your yardages wherever you are on the course, right on your wrist. You don't have to have your rangefinder in your pocket.
It's definitely taking us back full circle to that very first sentence around thinking about what sort of apps you use on a daily basis, or in this case, your iPhone as well, and your smartwatch. So thank you for sharing. That is all we have time for today. Thank you, Alex, for taking the time to join us on the podcast. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. This has been Trusted Talk. Until next time.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning into Trusted Talk, the Digital Certificate and Identity Security podcast. Today's episode wasn't just about information, it was about arming you with the knowledge to make critical security decisions immediately. If this episode gave you practical takeaways, don't wait. Subscribe to Trusted Talk on your favorite podcast platform and consider leaving a review to help other security professionals discover these essential insights. For even more urgent resources, like regulatory updates and automation tools, head over to GlobalSign.com. Join us next time as we tackle another pressing topic in digital identity and crypto agility. Until then, stay proactive, stay secure, and thank you for listening.